Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the Chicken Box. I'm your host, Jay. Solo show this week, but we have a super interesting guest, and I'm very excited to talk to her, and I think you will enjoy this conversation quite a bit. Dr. Shawna Norris, who is an executive coach, speaker, founder of Designer Discipline Consulting, and author of Glass Jars and Glass Ceilings, a novel exploring identity, ambition, and the hidden pressures women face in leadership and life. With a background as an executive and founder of Designer Discipline Consultant, Shawna works with senior leaders and organizations to navigate change and performance under pressure. Her work bridges real world leadership dynamics with storytelling that reflects the emotional and psychological realities behind success. In her career, Dr. Shawna Norris has worked with leaders across sectors who are navigating complexity, responsibility, and change in high stakes environments. Through her writing, coaching, and speaking, she challenges systems that reward endurance while offering little protection in return, helping women reclaim clarity, agency, and power in both their careers and personal lives. She holds 2 master's degrees and a doctoral degree supporting her work in emotional intelligence, leadership, and organizational behavior. Good morning, Dr. Shawna Norris. How are you?
Good morning, Jay. How are you? Thank you so much for having me today.
No problem, no problem. So, all right, let's get right into it. You've got that's a heck of a resume, I would say.
Thank you.
So there's a lot to go through. But um, first off, your consulting agency is called Designer Discipline. That's a pretty striking name for a consulting agency. What does that phrase mean to you, and what does that say about performance and sort of self-construction?
Thank you for that question. Yes, Designer Discipline is a company that I developed about 14 years ago. And the concept behind the name was being able to be disciplined and also design your future. So it kind of lends itself to what we're speaking of today, right? So I am able to design what I want to create in terms of performance, but I also have to have the discipline in order to execute that. And sometimes discipline has to do with perception, right? And perception is something that I can't alter what other people perceive, but I can definitely have the discipline to design my own outputs when it comes to performance.
Makes a lot of sense. We are the masters of our own ship, so to speak, in a
Yes.
lot of ways. Maybe not,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
completely. So okay, now it's interesting because you wrote this book, Glass Jars and Glass Ceilings. Why why do this as sort of a fictional narrative versus just sort of like a framework? Kind of, because I think a lot of people would just say you have a book. It's like this is what you do. Dot 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 dot. But instead, you wrote this sort of narrative story. Why did you go that route?
I love this question, Jay, and I'm so happy to expound on it. So, when I was thinking about my career and thinking about the women executives and the colleagues that I've had in the 20 years that I've been in executive leadership, something kept coming up for me. The fact that women are hitting this glass ceiling, and that is something that everyone is familiar, right? You say glass ceiling, people know what it is. But there were these other constraints, these other things that were containing women that were coming up repeatedly, right? And so, in that coming up for people repeatedly, I kept saying there's something to this. We're all experiencing something similar. It can be Black women, it could be white women. There was just something that was a nexus between us all that had to do with the glass ceiling, but something else. And I wanted to dig into what that something else was. So when I thought about the executives that I've coached and some of my own experiences, I said, wow, we're all going through suppression in some kind of way. And then I thought about this theory, and I'm glad that you spoke about it because you have the foresight to see that it did start out as a theory, right? Or a
Right.
framework that I'm working on. And that framework exists when we talk about the consequence, right? So that means the consequence of being who you are. As women, we move up the ladder and we get these positions. And when we get these positions, no one is really coaching us on how to behave and how to be congruently a woman and a leader, right? Because sometimes they're looked at through individual lenses. So as a woman, women are expected to be nurturing. Women are expected to be somewhat docile, right? The stereotypes. But when you're talking about a leader is supposed to be assertive. A leader is supposed to be straightforward, make quick decisions. So there is this congruent image that women are challenging when it comes to their womanhood and their their places as leaders. So then what we start to do is we start to see the consequences of being assertive leaders or betraying what people think we should be as women. And when that happens, we then adapt, right? So I have this theory that I call the smiley face theory. When we send executive emails, women used to always say things in group emails with a smiley face or a LOL that I noticed that my male colleagues did not do. Why? Because we're trying to soften our message. So we're adapting to what we think people's perception of us should be as leaders. And so you have the consequence, you have the adaptation, and then the adaptation becomes a rule, right? You start to say, oh, I must always deliver my message softly. I must lower my voice. I must not be so assertive so that they think that I'm being aggressive when I give a new idea. I must take time to go over my ideas because I can't seem like I'm rushing to a decision where someone else would be quick on their feet and rewarded, right? And so then we adopt that as the rule. But when that happens, then we have a boundary that we are self-imposing on ourselves because we do know the consequences. We can challenge it, but if we challenge it, then we feel like we get the consequence of doing that and we set our own boundaries. So when you start to quiet yourself, this happens, right? And so it's that containment and that containment theory. And so as I walked through that, Jay, and I know this is a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it dovetails into my next question perfectly. Keep going.
As I continue to walk through that theory and that framework, and a lot of my research, my current research is on leadership capability and readiness on being able to be a better leader. Well, a lot of what I discovered in my correlational study was that a leader has to be ready to receive executive coaching, to get development. But you put women in these situations where they can't even be themselves. So how are they able to then focus on being developed? It's not going to happen. And when you're managing perception, you're not just, so you're doing all the things and you're doing all the work and you're worried about how your boss perceives you, but then you're worried about how Gary perceives you, how Sally sees you, how Hal in accounting perceives you. So how can you psychologically handle that boatload? So I say that to say, I thought about the theory and I said, this is really great. And when I discuss it with women, they understand it and they understand how to notice it and then how to climb out of it. And then I said, well, listen, how can I get this to a broader audience? How can I get people to really read about this? Because Jay, it doesn't only mean that you're being contained in your professional life. As women, we have other things. We have our families, our marriages, our friendships. That's something that people don't speak about a lot, about the work that it takes to maintain 10, 20, 30-year friendships, right? So when I'm thinking of all these things, I said, well, my theory would talk about it from a professional lens, but who's going to dive into marriages that are tough or being a mother or being a good friend? And so I came up with this character and her name is Olivia. And I came up with the theory of just starting to write about Olivia, right? How does this woman executive walk through these steps in her life? So the book takes Olivia from college, where I have a fictional Morgan State University. It's called Logan State University in the city of Baltimore. And it walks the story through all of these different containments in these different areas of her life and how she eventually tries to buck the system and challenge it to be her true authentic self. And I just thought that a story would be more relatable, right? So you already spoiled the idea. I am working on an academic book.
Okay.
That will partner with Glass Jars, Glass Ceilings, or just be a separate book, but that will walk people more formally through that lens. But who wants to pick up an academic book on a plane when you're going to Barbados? No, you want to read a good book that has a little bit of romance, a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of, storytelling. So that is why I made the book. Now it's a little bit of a thick book, so you can see the research.
I see. Okay.
It has 3 parts, but it is a great book. So thank you for allowing me to speak about that.
Yeah, no worries. No, I think, I'm definitely coming from a perspective of a guy who, wants to see women be treated. I'm very much a guy who's for sort of a egalitarian society.
Yes.
100%, right? It's much more equal.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm doing my level best, okay? Like as a guy, and I understand that we are given extremely, much like, with racism, like we're
Mhm.
given a massive head start,
Mhm.
over a lot of these things.
Mhm.
So
And I don't want you to downplay that. I think that's very important, and I don't want you to
no,
gloss over it because
yeah,
having an ally in that space from another male, from another Black male, is very important.
yeah,
Because in the book, also, and I'm so glad you spoke to that, there are men in her life that suppress her. There are men
yeah,
who are not giving her that room to be who she is. But there are characters of men, and there are archetypes of characters of men in that book that are very supportive of Olivia, and it was very important for me as a woman writer to have that balance, right? To
yeah.
show the men such as yourself who support us. So I thank you for that. And I didn't want you to gloss over what you do.
Okay, I appreciate it. I definitely was not saying that for praise, but I appreciate it. No, I mean, I guess my larger point is, as much as I try to understand these things, and I think men should try to empathize with women's situations, I still think we have massive blinders on. I mean,
Oh, certainly.
it's just the nature of things, right? It's it's hard to understand what someone else is going through, especially in someone who is treated in a way that I think is worse
Yes.
than yourself, to kind of put yourself in those shoes. And even the best you can, it's like, I still don't get it because you're coming from a different perspective. It makes
Right.
sense.
Absolutely.
And I was going to ask you to explain what the difference was, the glass jars versus glass ceilings, but I think you did a pretty good job of answering that, which is the glass jars are the containments that women put themselves in, and
Right.
maybe to some degree society, but mostly because you're adapting to what society is asking you, you kind of lock yourself in. Is that a correct
Absolutely.
assumption?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay. Um, and like I hear women talk about that, and other people talk about these sort of boundaries that we create for ourselves. But I think the idea, I've never heard someone use the term a glass jar, and I think that resonates well because people, like you said, do know the term glass ceiling, right? To break
Right.
the glass ceiling. For women, I think it's an important analogy. Um, do you find that the sort of this weight of performance and perception obviously weighs heavy on women? I mean, I think that's obvious. Do you find that there is a different level of weight for Black women very specifically, and what makes that much harder than, I think, maybe men and women who are not Black women? What do they not understand about that?
Most certainly. I think that is an important question. And I think there's nothing wrong with pointing out what the differences are amongst us in terms of our backgrounds and our cultures. I can certainly see women of color, women of any cultural background relating to glass jars, glass ceilings. But this is a book that's written by a Black woman who had a Black woman's experience. And the difference between other women of other races and men is that culturally, as Black women, we have been raised to have a high level of metacognition, right? We have to
Mhm.
do so many things. And we've been raised to say, most of us, I can't say all of us. This is why I'm going to do a study about the self-containment theory, because I do want to be able to back it up by empirical research. But
Right.
in general, we do know the thoughts or the patterns of Black women of, okay, you have to put your big girl panties on. You have
Right.
to cry it out and then be tough. You have to be able to show up and be better than the rest. You have to be able to, you can't even give yourself a little inch of not dressing properly, not speaking properly. You must code switch. You must do all of these things that maybe in a different societal situation, they don't have to do that. And I've had those discussions with women of other cultures who say, no, Shawna, I certainly recognize that when I say something, I may not be questioned about my methods as my colleague who is a African American woman, or
Right.
such as yourself, a man saying men can have men speak, right? And they can speak very harshly. But when a Black woman raises her voice, the first thing that comes to mind that everyone talks about is aggression, right? And
Right. Of
I don't
course.
know, that could be just false perceptions or what television or social media may put in people's faces, but that is not always the case. I don't find that other people have to quiet who they are or explain, right? So it's not just the
Right.
quieting, it's the explaining your decisions. It's the smiley face syndrome, right? The I'm asking you to do something because I'm your leader, but I don't want to necessarily have you say that I'm not liked, or say that I'm not a great leader, or that I'm asking you to do something because I'm lazy, right? Other
Right.
people don't have to qualify when they step into their leadership roles. And so I think that that's the difference. And I think it's important to not just speak from experience, but to really get the data to support that. And that is why my second study that I'm working on in terms of leadership will be specifically directed towards Black women and interviewing Black women to see how the containment theory stands up and whether or not it is a real theory that impacts people. Because if we do that, then we can figure out how to teach about it, and then how to help people combat it, and also how to teach others to recognize it, even if
Right.
it's something that's subconscious, right?
Yeah. No, that's an excellent. I look forward to hearing about this study. That's a very excellent point.
Thank
Um,
you.
you mentioned code switching actually.
Yes.
Code switching, covering, sort of performing competence, and
Yes.
managing other people's comfort in the workplace. These are things that Black professionals have to do all
All
the
the time.
time. So,
Yeah.
we're constantly balancing this. Um, you know, Black men as well, by the way.
Of course.
Um, but what is that doing to, or what's your theory on this? What is that doing to us, sort of like neurologically or emotionally, to have to be constantly kind of pivoting back and forth, and you don't want to talk like you talk at home. You
Mhm.
gotta you gotta make people comfortable and all sorts of stuff. That's a plight of Black folks in society, but then to have to do it in the workplace is a
Mhm.
sort of a jungle in a lot of ways, because
Mhm.
in society someone goes, all right, well, I have this perception of you, and then you just kind of move on, and I never interact with this person again, right? Like in a
Mhm.
mall or something. But at
Right.
work you can lose your job, you can
Yes.
have your careers stymied and things like that. So, like, what is that doing to we'll talk Black women very specifically, what is that doing to Black women having to navigate all of that?
That's a great question. And that is also why I'm navigating towards this study to hopefully get funding to get additional support in researching this. So you talked about the stymieing and the consequence of that, right?
Mm,
So reason why we do it initially is because we're afraid of the consequences of losing our positions, of being perceived in a different light where our jobs can be at stake. However, you're right, it is doing a job on us, not only mentally, but also health wise, right? So, what I'm recognizing is when I'm coaching Black women executives and they're coming and they're offloading about where they want to be, but where they're at and why they're stuck where they are, I'm also seeing, and as an executive coach, what it is we can identify when someone needs something additional than coaching, right? So I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm not a psychiatrist. However, the percentage of women, Black women, out of all of my other clients that come in that I normally have to refer to a psychologist or a psychiatrist is astounding when I look at just my own numbers. And
sure.
I know that statistics are supporting the fact that women of color are seeking psychiatric support in larger numbers and also taking medication to help combat that. So, what happens? Let's just talk about a concrete example. I'll talk about the book. Spoiler alert, in the book, there is a situation where Olivia is in a professional capacity where everything is compounding on her and she's dealing with a great deal of sexism. And all of a sudden, her heart is just beating, beating, beating. She goes to the bathroom. She has a panic attack. She thinks she's having a heart attack. But let me tell you what Olivia says while she's experiencing this panic attack that she thinks is a heart attack. Through her mind, she says, oh my gosh, no time for that. The board needs to report next week. I have to go pick up my daughters. What will my husband say if he knows that I'm having a heart attack and he has to leave work? And oh my gosh, what would the rest of my colleagues think? This is what this woman is having a breakdown on the floor, a panic attack. She's eventually diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. And instead of folding into the fact that you are ill, you are worried about the perception, right?
Mm,
Performance versus perception, what we're talking about
right.
today.
Right.
You're worried about the perception of what people will think of you if you're having that actual heart attack. And that speaks to what Black women are going through.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for that. I mean, I think we often assume that our experiences are everyone else's experiences, right? This sort of
Mhm.
like this kind of mirror situation. And I think when you're, especially if you're not if you're a man or you're, very specifically not a black woman in this case, like I just don't think people understand that these sort of systemic issues that have plagued the black community and black women, um, this is not 4,000 years ago. Like this is not, ancient history. This is very recent history that these things are still sort of laying on the backs of black women. And to your point, having to juggle the sort of general societal issues and then
Mhm,
juggle the racial issues on top of that. Um,
mhm.
I don't think people realize quite how astoundingly difficult that is when you actually talk to black women. You're like, I probably should just listen more because
Right,
I didn't know all of these things, right? And like,
right.
it's just I'm glad you point out that sort of that moment in the book because that what am I supposed to do with like my everyday things? I don't have time to be stressed or I don't have time to have
Have a heart attack.
a panic attack or a heart attack, right? Like
Right,
who is thinking of that instead of like I feel like there's an elephant on my chest, right? You know what I
right.
mean? Like that
Be
would
a
be the
doctor.
right. Like that's it, you would think take care of yourself first, but
Yes,
that's
yes,
sadly not the thought
yeah.
process. Um,
And Jay,
it,
just to piggyback off of that, I'm sorry.
yeah, no,
It's
no, go for it.
accommodation, right? So we are a very accommodating sex and
Sure.
race, right?
Yes.
We're nourishers and nurturers. We want
Right.
everyone to feel comfortable. We don't like making people feel uncomfortable. Some of us. And then we have those of us who just don't care, but then they have that stigma, right? They get that big B word put on them and they just have this hardened shell. So where is
Which
the
which I think they care, but they care much more than they pretend
Of
to care.
course, of
Right.
course.
Yeah.
And so where is that balance? And you brought up something that's very, very key. You said, how long has it been? So think about it. How long have we as women been in the boardroom? How many years have we
Right.
been in these corporate environments where we make these multi-million dollar decisions and still to this day tend to be one of the only ones in the room that look like us, right? I know that my grandmother did day work. Okay. And if people don't know what day work is, that's you cleaned the homes of other people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Or you have my godmother started off as a secretary who could never have imagined being a senior executive in government or being a top CEO or in the C suite in corporate America. So this is
Right.
new for us. So we're
Yeah.
still taking all of that, what we've been trained from our foremothers, and now we're trying to handle knowing how we're supposed to step lightly in these rooms where in business you can't step lightly. You have to make decisions fast and it's millions of dollars on the table and you cannot be unsure about your decisions, but yet society has told us we have to wait, we can't rush to judgment, we have to triple check ourselves, we
Right.
have to be really nice when we say we're taking your company down with a smile.
Right. Right. I
Yeah.
mean, to your point there, like I was just thinking about actually this week, and I was having a conversation with my wife about it. Like we are living in a time, like again, time is this like weird thing that everyone thinks all of these, sort of discrimination, everything else happened, a half a million years ago, right? And it's like we're literally in a time where we've never had a person of color run for president who was born when black people could vote. Like I don't think people realize that. Oh, it was so long. No, man. It really wasn't. It's your mother's, it's your mother's life. Like it's not
Wow.
that hard to understand.
Yes,
And
for sure.
and to that point, going from these sort of like day work like you're talking about with your grandmother to being, in the C-suite, black women being in these C-suite positions, like
Mhm.
women just were allowed to get their own credit cards in 1974. Like it wasn't 1874, guys. Like it's the time frame in which progress has happened for people of color and women of color very specifically in this conversation is incredibly small, right? So within my lifetime or barely outside of my lifetime, these things just became available. So
Right.
it is just I don't think people realize when you're talking about breaking out of these glass jars and breaking through these glass ceilings, like the ability to even see the ceiling or see
Right.
the outside of the jar just happened in 1974. People listen to music that was older than that, like every day.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. People have
So
clothes. I know my father has clothing older than
right,
that.
exactly. Like you hang out with people who are older than that. So
Yes. Definitely.
it's just the understanding of like how short of a time in which women are trying to break out of these, out of these, stereotypes or out of these societal positions and things like that. And Black
Yes.
women very,
Exactly.
very specifically.
Yeah, thank
Um,
you for pointing that out, Jay. And I'd like to also add that think about it. Many of us are first generation college graduates,
that's
right?
correct. Yeah.
Well, all of the systems that say other cultures had, where they have legacy when it comes to attending higher level universities or attending college, rather, being in professional settings, having their fathers, business partners come to the table and understanding how discourse goes when you discuss business or how you mix the two, how you
Right.
network. We are all learning these things. These are a lot of things that our mothers did not know. So we
Right.
had no one to teach us. So we're figuring it out. And as we're figuring it out, we're harming ourselves because no one is naming this glass containment theory.
Right.
No one is showing a woman and saying, this is what it is, this is why it exists, and this is how you can step out of it. So that's why conversations such as this, and I'm so grateful for the invitation to your platform today, are important so that people can name it, have a name for it.
Yeah. No, I, I think that's, I find it very intriguing, right? Because what we're talking about at the end of the day is giving Black women humanity, right? And it feels like that should be the most obvious thing in the world, but it isn't for at least for American society. I would argue world
Yes,
society,
yes.
but I live here, but it's this idea of allowing women to succeed and to achieve things, but also allow them to have balance, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
And trying to simultaneously trying to relieve some of that need for that level of balance, right? Because men historically have been allowed to achieve many things and go, hey, take care of the kids. I'm out of here. I'll see you in 6 months as I'm making all of this money. It's like, okay, cool, but like, could you come back and see your children, right? So
Yes, yes,
like
yes.
figuring out what that balance is, and I think society is trying to do that, not doing such a great job at it, but
Yeah.
people like you working on the sort of the front lines of this kind of stuff and helping women sort of personally recognize that maybe burning themselves out to get here is not necessarily the right idea, and also you still have the right to try to achieve these things, right? And trying to figure out what that balance is, right? um
Exactly, exactly.
so my question to you is, many high achieving Black women are holding up families, organizations, corporations, that sort of thing, and their own, communities, simultaneously. Where does any level of personal agency come into play? Like how does hey, what you are you doing the things that are healthy for yourself? Like how does that work? Do you address that?
Well, that shows up in that whole glass ceiling, right? And that's why I call the theory a self-containment theory, because of
Sure.
course, when I go down the list of consequence, adapting, making adaptation the rule, and then the boundary, those are external, but how we react to it is internal, right?
Sure.
And so having these kinds of discussion, talking to other women, um, women, especially Black women, we have a tendency to want to hide, right, what we're going through. We don't
Mhm.
necessarily want, and that's also culturally, we were raised, what happens at home stays at home. You don't discuss these things. Where I find in my experience, other cultures of women discuss things, right? They
Sure.
support one another. They'll tell one another what the other makes. I make $250,000. Black women traditionally don't want to do that, right? So we can't compare notes. And if we can't compare notes, then we can't support one another. So
Why do you think, sorry to interrupt, why do you think that is? Why do you
I,
think that sort of that disconnect of wanting to, not just about salary, but talking about these things? Why do you think that exists?
perception, and a little bit of feeling like, can everyone be here with me? If I'm the only
Mm.
one at the table, is there room for another Shawna at the table? So do I
Okay.
necessarily, even if it's subconsciously, do I want to share with this woman? Is there enough space for more than just me? And then women don't want other women to see them as weak, right? So there's this perception of weakness. And then there's that cultural piece to it where we were raised by our mothers to say, don't say what's happening. No one has to talk about what's happening in the home. Because a large piece of this, Jay, is not just the professional containment, it is all the other things. And we all know that people have relationship issues. We all know that there are issues with alcoholism, drug abuse. There's still domestic abuse that occurs, right? And then there's pressure from friendships, there's jealousy, there's envy, there's ego. There are all these other things because people are afraid to just be their vulnerable selves. And I understand that, right? Some people, jealousy is very prevalent. People can attack you. People can use what you share with them against you when there's conflict. But that's why there needs to be more building a fellowship with women as well. Because if we take the time to invest in those friendships and build those layers, there should be a foundational respect that we all have, and where we're able to share, where we're able to say, well, how can I help you? I've been through this, right? So when I went through a workplace issue where it became a legal issue, I was open to having other women come to me and say, how did you handle the workplace when you were blackballed, or when you spoke up, or when the cost of fighting this court case became too much? What did you do? An open book, because it helps, right? And it also helps to bring the recognition to the fact that this is a problem. So when I want to go back to you asking me, why did I do a book instead of a theory? Because the book also talks about the dichotomy of friendships, right? And how friendships can help or support someone who's in that class containment. So again, Olivia goes through having foundational friendships that she formed at Logan State University, and how those friendships either supported or fractured her, where she felt like she had to silence herself because if maybe another friend didn't perceive themselves as doing as well as she was doing, right? So there are so many different aspects. I'm hitting on the tip of the iceberg of what exploration of these themes can go and how they can be helpful to one another. But to answer your question, the reason why I think that happens is because of how we've been raised to keep things to ourselves, to not expose anything that will make us look vulnerable.
I think that's a powerful point. And I think, I have to imagine that trying to sort of keep that level of distance is obviously a protection mechanism, right?
Of course.
Or protection response is what I should say. But yeah, I guess when you are trying to come up, I mean, I've started a business before, and they tell, a lot of, one of the things they talk about is sort of the like the loneliness of being, of starting a business and running it yourself. And you kind of get in those, like, that drought part where you don't have anybody else in the organization to be like, hey, this is the stuff I'm going through, because nobody else knows what it's like to be the CEO of that company. And that's why they tell you to befriend other CEOs, because they have a similar experience. And and it's very true. It's a very accurate experience that I've personally had, because it gets hard, right? Like and so this idea that Black women don't have those communities, or perhaps fractured communities, because of what has been taught to us or has been taught to them, societal wise, to kind of keep yourself separate, is, equality is sort of this table, and there's only so many chairs, which is fundamentally not correct, right?
Absolutely.
Right. But people often think that it is, right? Like, if I get a seat at the table, then that there's not going to be enough room, and then I have to leave with somebody else. Like, no, everybody we could all sit together. Like, it's cool.
At the table at the building next door, there's a Google, there's a Yahoo, there are different companies. And another thing about that is you're talking about the support mechanisms. And as an executive coach, this is one of the mechanisms that are given to leaders for development, right? So you have executive coaching, where if I executive coach a general company subset or cohort of executives, I have the men that come in and they're ready. They're like, this is what I need, Shawna, this is what I'm going through. I'll have women that will come in and they are so preoccupied with what they have to do that they can't even be present in the coaching, right? So we're giving the support mechanisms, but there's so much pressure because again, we're going back to the me. I'm challenging me and what this person thinks, that person thinks, my team thinks, my boss thinks. I find that other executives don't come in with that. They just are like, hey, how can I get my people to work? Or, hey, how can I maybe stop working on weekends? Where women come in with all these other things, it's almost like, I don't have time to do this coaching, right? So you don't even have time to develop yourself. And another thing that I wanted to add, when you talked about how difficult it can be to not have other people, I was on a different show and it was 3 women who were moderators. And I'm going to pose this question to you too, Jay.
Sure.
Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in the workplace and had to go in a bathroom stall and cry? Have you ever done that?
No.
Okay.
No.
I asked that question on a panel with 3 other women and they all raised their hands.
Yeah.
So that's just giving you a visual or just a level of how prevalent this is, right? So these women did not know I was going to ask them that question. They're all executive women, fellow executive coaches who have had careers 20, 30 years. And every woman, including myself, raised our hand. But I said, if we were to ask for men that same question, it would not be the same response.
No, I mean, I would argue the response would probably be, if they were being honest, would be something to the effect of, like, I might have gone into the stall and yelled because men sadly are only given the emotions of happiness or anger.
And that's a whole nother book in theory, right?
100%. Like, we're not cavemen, but so yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a very real, and it all comes back to that sort of balance, right? And that actually kind of dovetails into something else I want to talk about, which is emotional intelligence, which I mentioned in your bio, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would like you to define emotional intelligence for folks who don't know and how you see emotional intelligence, but it is central to, I assume, your doctoral work, right?
Oh, yes, 100%.
Right. And emotional intelligence, I don't think is valued. I think people just say IQ, right? Just, how smart is this person? But then you get someone who's super smart and has no ability to like understand that they're not working with other robots, right? And so it's like, yeah, humans are, interesting and they have emotions. You got to figure out, how to balance between that. How do you make the case to your executives that you work with that emotional intelligence is a thing, at least in my opinion, is almost more valuable than what we think of as sort of traditional intelligence, or is it equally as important?
Thank you for that question as well. So what I did in my previous study is I looked at whether or not executive coaching is related, correlation, not causation, but is executive coaching related to executives improving their developmental readiness, meaning their readiness to show up and be developed, which we just spoke about, their emotional intelligence, and then the next step would be their change management leadership skills. So basically, are they ready to be developed? When they show up to be developed, are they looking internally? Are they seeing the nexus and the connection between the person that they are and the values that they hold and how they lead, and whether or not it can impact their team? So when you talk about emotional intelligence, and just in a layman's terms, it's how do you perceive your empathy and your psychological capacity to understand other people and understand yourself, right? So you said that very eloquently. A lot of times, I was an HR executive for many years, and people were promoted based on their skill set. If they knew how to do oceanography, or if they knew how to be an aviator, they just got the next promotion. But did they know how to talk with their colleagues? Did they know how to do business development? Did they know how to network? Did they know how to deal with team members who were going through personal issues, right? So we all know that you can be a great accountant, you can be a great, medical doctor, but do you have that bedside manner? And what does that come with? A lot of times when I coach the executives, we'll do something called value setting. So what I ask them to look at values and then show up and tell me, what are your most important values? Now, that values, there are hundreds of values, right? But I ask them to identify their top 5. So that could be respect, that could be loyalty, that could be efficiency. So whatever that is, I ask them about their personal values. And then I say, well, how does that show up when you work? And then that's to get them to see the nexus to how you live your whole person. You bring your whole person to work. So when you get to work, you don't have to put on the facade of being the big person in the office, just giving out orders. Why? Right? Because you're dealing with people. You don't have to be that person. No one is even respecting that anymore. Nobody cares about the watch after 35 years. Nobody cares that you have the office.
Right.
Nobody cares that you're in the corner. Nobody even wants to be in the office anymore. They want to work from home. So how
Right.
do you connect with your people? And so when I get them to discuss how do you relate with the people that you love at home, that is not that much different. It is a workplace. I'm not going to use the word love, but relational capacity and empathy to understand other people, and how you get that so tenfold back when you give your people that. But do you understand yourself, right? Do you understand
Right.
what your values are? So I'll make a concrete example. If I share with my team as an executive leader that respect is very important to me, I want to be respected, and respecting other people is the utmost importance to me. I would never want anyone to think that I'm disrespecting them. If I, as a leader, show up and I'm in the middle of a crunch time and I'm really busy, and you knock on my door and I say, hold up, Jay, give me 5 minutes and I'll get with you. You can turn around and you can say, that's not Shawna shutting her door when she has an open door policy. That's not Shawna being disrespectful. I already know that one of her values, and she said it with authority, that is respect. So now I understand that was just a moment. She's not being disrespectful. But do you know how many times the miscommunication between executives and their teams, because they do not know the values of their leader, the leader does not share them, and they don't elicit or solicit the values of their team members. And that's just basic understanding. So it's getting to the core of who we are as people, because we can all show up and do the job, but can we relate to people? And that's the thing that AI won't take away. Everyone is afraid about AI. I said, AI cannot take away the relationships that you have to build with people. So that kind of goes to how I define emotional intelligence, and how I find when you define it for executives, how it helps them in their leadership.
No, I think that's perfect. And look, I'll give you a very quick example of what I think is probably some of the best, like the easiest way to understand emotional intelligence. If anybody is still sort of not quite getting it, here's a person who is about as far away from a black woman, but I think the point still stands, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen the show Ted Lasso, right?
I have
Um,
seen a couple of episodes.
yeah, it's a fantastic show, by the way.
Mhm.
I'm not being paid by them, but the entire point of that show is that here is a guy who does not have the quote unquote intelligence to run a soccer team, because he is a football coach from the US, to run a British soccer team. But that's not the reason why he's successful. He's successful because his emotional intelligence is so high. So he is all about taking this team and digging into who they are, and then sharing. He has difficulties with that, but sharing who he is.
Mhm.
And through that emotional intelligence, that actually, it's like these people can already do the job. That's why they were hired.
Mhm.
But who are the people behind the uniforms, and why are they there, right? And
Mhm.
once you tap into that, then you unlock this entire different reason for these people being so important in what they're doing.
Mhm.
It's a super easy way. If you're like, what the heck is emotional intelligence? Watch that show.
Watch Ted Lasso.
Watch Ted Lasso. It's a perfect example of why understanding human beings and their emotions, and your own emotions relative to them,
Mhm.
is so much more important than, can you do this job? Can you, write down this, create this spreadsheet? It's far more important.
Precisely, Jay. And
Right.
I like to say that you can be if you have high emotional intelligence, you can be a leader in NASA, in Pepsi, and
100%.
any industry. Those leadership skills and that emotional intelligence, it goes with you from industry to industry. Like you said, I don't have to be the master of everything that my team does. That's what they're there for. They're there to set me up for success. My mastering comes from being able to navigate as a leader and give my team what they need to be successful and to answer
Exactly.
to the higher ups.
Exactly. No, I think that's a perfect response, honestly. Um, I'm gonna ask one final question before we do our get on the box segment, which is, what does it look like when a black woman actually stops performing for external validation? What changes first, and what gets harder before it kind of gets better?
Well, when you stop performing for external validation, there is a transition period, right? You're going to go through periods of being misunderstood, you're going to possibly go through suppression. I was an executive that went through that, right? My role was suppressed, and I ultimately left a job because I spoke up about oppression, and I was myself, right? But I will challenge you to recognize that your health will get better, right? I would never want to be back in those boardrooms and at those tables feeling the way that I did. And like I said, I am echoing what I'm hearing from other women executives, right? That pressure. You so rightly spoke about the medical impacts. We spoke about anxiety, panic attacks, medication, psychotherapy, all of these things. When you start to be your true self, and moderation, I get people are fearful, right, Jay? What do people need? People need to be able to take care of their families. They need their incomes, right? But being able to know that all of the things that you've done, all of the things you've done to be at that table, you don't know. And this is not just Black women. I've had white women in other cultures still asking for permission to be in the seat that they've had for 20, 30 years as the leader. And I'm like, you realize that you're still asking for permission to show up. You're not the 19-year-old that walked through that door. You've done the work. Be confident that you've done the work, because two things will happen. Either you'll have an organization where you feel pushed out, or you'll leave, or the organization will recognize, wait a second, I do need her. I do need her skills. She is phenomenal, and they will start to do some internal changes as well. But that is a risk, and I don't want to pretend that I don't understand that being your authentic self, or bucking against the system, or identifying those things that suppress you, are not a dangerous thing as a woman who went through it and suffered the consequences. But I wouldn't go back, because your health and your self-respect, those are what are important. If you've done the work to get there, you can do it someplace else. If you've done, maybe not in this economy, sorry, but if you've done the work to get there, you can build your own, right? All of these degrees that we have that our grandparents didn't have, they give us permission. I'm going to quote the good Dr. Melvin Jones, to vote with your feet, right? That means that you have decision-making authority. The days of staying with a company for 35 years are out the window. The new generation that's oriented, they're coming in 2, 3, maybe 5 years, and they're taking that knowledge and they're leaving. So it's about us unlearning some of the systematic things that we've learned growing up, and how to step outside of that, and also take note of what some of the younger generation is doing, right? Because we can never be, so I have all of these degrees and I'm learning every day, Jay, and I'm open to learning. So I think being curious, asking questions, being vulnerable, building more support systems amongst your own peers, all of that will help you be able to get out of that glass jar and combat those glass ceilings.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Okay, this is the segment where the get on the box segment. So I'm going to go first and give my thoughts before we get out of here, and then Dr. Shawna Norris is going to finish us out. Look, I often like to pull quotes from people who I think do this much better than I do when it is relevant. And I'm going to read part of this quote, and then I will tell you where it's from. I think people might find it surprising, but some people might recognize it right away. So the quote is, "You have to be a career woman, but also be looking out for other people. You have to answer the men's bad behavior, which is insane. But if you point it out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men. You're not, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much, and then threaten other women because you're supposed to be part of a sisterhood. But always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget that the system is rigged. So find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard, it's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you." So that is actually a quote written by Greta Gerwig. That's a quote from the Barbie movie.
Wow.
Yeah, if you've never seen that movie, it's excellent, in my opinion. But that rant goes a little bit longer, but I shouldn't even call it a rant. I mean, I think it's a statement of fact, is that to be a woman in modern society is nothing but a set of contradictions in a lot of ways, right? So it's like, go left, but make sure you go right, right? It's like, be an introvert, but also be an extrovert, like type of thing. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing to kind of combat this, which is life is, in fact, a lot of contradictions. It is. It is the way the world is for everyone. But I think the special set of contradictions that women deal with can be sort of very, like notoriously difficult to deal
Mhm.
with. And then for Black women very specifically, I think there is another layer on top of that. There's another glass ceiling on top of the glass
Yes,
ceiling,
yes,
right? And I think there is a bigger jar, while
or
they're also in another jar, right? So
yeah,
I think acknowledging that work or acknowledging that existence of those systems and doing your best to help women become aware of them and to break out of those systems, I think in what I think should be a constant move towards an egalitarian society, I think that only helps. It doesn't just help women. And it doesn't just help Black women, but it actually helps society for young kids to see their mothers
yeah.
break out of those jars, and then those young girls or young boys grow up and go, oh wait, I remember that. Like, I'm not cool with that type of oppression. I'm not cool with that. And that's how society gets a little bit better every time through every generation. So I appreciate your work in doing that and helping to break those jars and break those ceilings. So thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Sure. Your turn is now on the box.
So now I'm on the box. So I'm going to maybe copycat a little bit off of what you did. So in the book again that I refer to, women, I want you to know that I see you, right? I see us trying to walk the weight off, trying to take enough magnesium, trying to get the peptides, trying to get our skin right, trying to take our multivitamins, trying to get together with our girlfriends, trying to go back to school, trying to be attracted to your husband still, all of the things. I see you. And I want you to know that you are not alone. But what I want you to start to do is to be a little bit vulnerable. Let's start to have a little bit trust in one another. Let's open up a little bit more. Let's share a little bit more. Let's all raise our hands if we've cried in that bathroom stall, because it will be loosening that lid of that glass ceiling and giving you some space to breathe and some space to actually exhale and come up out of that jar. So I want you to know that I see you. I am working on naming this for you. I am working on getting you all funding to get support and for it to be recognized in workplaces, and just keep showing up. And if something gets in your way and it doesn't feel right, know that you've earned your space by what you've done to be there, and you can take your talents elsewhere.
Excellent. There you go. So,
And Jay, I just wanted to, I don't know, we're about to close out. I just wanted to let you know that in celebration of this exchange between you and I have Glass Jars, Glass Ceilings, which is available at all booksellers, but I have made it free for download on Kindle for today. So any of your
nice.
listeners who are listening will be able to get their own copy of Glass Jars, Glass Ceilings for free via Kindle on Amazon.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for that. And hopefully a lot of people will pull it down and start reading. Because
Yeah.
again, you showed it. It's pretty thick. You may not realize that on a digital download, but there you go.
It's pretty. It's 3 parts, so it's like you can read it as book 1, book 2, book 3. But and also men. My forward, I actually speak about how I want men to read it. How I think it's an important read for men as well. So I challenge you too, Jay, and
All
and
right.
your wife, Doctor Mrs. J,
Sure.
to perhaps put it on your reading list as well, and then compare notes and talk about it.
Okay. All right. Look, don't threaten me with a good time. All right. No problem. All right. So, Dr. Shawna Norris, thank you for your time. I appreciate it. And I appreciate your work. I think it's incredibly important. All right. That is it for this episode of The Chicken Box. And we will see you guys next time. Bye.